One of the most famous rivalries in the UFC's middleweight division in the early 2010s was between Michael Bisping and Dan Henderson. Their fights went on for almost a decade. Two very different men from very different places met twice in the octagon, splitting the wins 1-1. In this video, we'll discuss why their feud began and how it got so heated. First off, the two fighters and their journeys. The rivalry between Henderson and Bisping started on Season 9 of The Ultimate Fighter, but it's important to look at how both men got to where they are now. The path that each man took to get to the show couldn't have been more different. Henderson was known to be a two-time Pride champion before he entered the TUF house. Henderson was already good enough to be in the Hall of Fame by 2009, but Bisping was a young fighter trying to make a name for himself at middleweight. Whether you like him or dislike him, Michael Bisping should be remembered as one of the best UFC fighters of all time. His path to the title was full of major setbacks and losses at key points, which would have made any fighter lose faith, but not Bisping. Bisping started doing martial arts like judo, boxing, kickboxing, and karate at a young age and showed a lot of promise, but he had to stop going to school full-time to get a real job, so he worked in many different trades. At different times, he was an upholsterer, a postman, a tiller, and a plasterer. He gave up everything to become an MMA fighter, even though he knew deep down that fighting was his true calling. Rashad Evans had just stopped the British star from fighting at light heavyweight, so he needed a big win at 185 pounds. To make things even more exciting, the winner would get a chance to fight for the title against Anderson Silva. Up next, The Ultimate Fighter. Michael Bisping was one of the Ultimate Fighter coaches who people remember most fondly, and there was a reason for that. Even though he was already known for talking trash, he really turned it up against the usually quiet Henderson. He quickly made the veteran inside the house angry. Bisping's trash talk only got worse when Henderson's American-led team lost to the British team. As UFC 100 approached, the fight had a lot of heat because the British star had been trash-talking the legend in every way possible. Everyone thinks that UFC 100 is one of the best fight cards of all time, and they're right. Brock Lesnar's historic win in the main event, Georges St. Pierre's dominance over Thiago Alves in the co-main, and Dan Henderson's brutal knockout of Michael Bisping are all moments that will be remembered. Moving on to UFC 100. As the fight time got closer, Bisping's talk moved the odds closer to even, but he was still a moderate underdog going into the fight. Henderson wasn't only the better wrestler, but he also hit harder and had one of the strongest chins in the history of the sport. Most of us thought that Bisping's only chance to win the fight was to stick and move and dance his way to a careful technical decision, but as the first round ended and the second one began, Bisping ignored the advice of his cornermen and circled to Henderson's left side. This put him in range for Henderson's powerful overhand right. In the second round, Henderson landed his signature H-bomb right on Bisping's jaw, knocking him out before he even hit the ground. It was UFC 100, and it was a title eliminator. It was also one of the worst knockouts in UFC history. Bisping fell to the ground and was already out when he hit the mat, but Henderson wasn't done yet. Before the referee could stop the fight, Henderson hit Bisping in the face with a forearm while he was in the air. When asked if the last shot was a sign of his anger at Bisping during filming of The Ultimate Fighter 9, Henderson said yes, and that the last hit was meant to shut his mouth. Henderson's huge knockout of Bisping was one of, if not the best finish of 2009. After their fight at UFC 100, both men went in very different directions. In the next 5 years, the Brits' record would drop from 17-1 to 25-7, followed by how they went on different paths. By 2015, many of us thought that Bisping's time as a fighter was almost over. The force and damage done by Henderson's right hand was enough to end a fighter's career early and hurt his or her confidence. Despite all of this, Bisping went back into the octagon 4 months later and beat Dennis Kang in 2 rounds. Henderson got a second chance to fight after he knocked out Bisping. He didn't want to fight Silva again, so he left the UFC and joined Strikeforce. He was one of the most well-known fighters in Strikeforce. His time in the UFC and his years in the game have made him a well-known figure. Since Strikeforce's light heavyweights are good but not the best, Henderson had a good chance of stopping the trend of 205-pound champions handling the belt to someone else as soon as they win it. There, he won the light heavyweight title and knocked Fedor Emelianenko out. Henderson stunned the last Emperor with a solid hook. He followed up with his usual clinch work against the cage, landing a barrage of tight knees and using his weight against Fedor to slow him down. After they broke apart, the fight started, and Fedor knocked Henderson out with a clean blow. Fedor drove in for the kill to finish Henderson off while he was on the ground. By the middle of the 2010s, he too was getting on in years, but he was still considered one of the best action fighters in the business. Next, Bisping's run to the title. After Michael Bisping lost to Luke Rockhold at the end of 2014, many people thought that he was no longer a contender. Instead, it was the start of one of the most amazing comeback stories ever. He beat CB Dollaway and Thales Leitz in his next 2 fights, which got him a spot in the main event to fight Anderson Silva. Just 2 fights before, the Spider had fought for middleweight gold. Bisping pulled off an amazing upset in his hometown. In one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, Bisping beat Rockhold and took his title. The challenger was a 21-4 underdog, which was mostly because the champion had destroyed Bisping so badly only 18 months before. But the title went to the man from Manchester, England, after he hit him with 2 clean left hooks and more punches while he was on the ground. Before the end, this fight was a lot of fun to watch. The Brit got the biggest win of his career when he knocked the legend down and outboxed him on the way to a unanimous decision victory. With only 17 days' notice, he was given the chance to fight for the title against Luke Rockhold at UFC 199. Not to mention, UFC 199 was something to remember. While Michael Bisping was fighting Luke Rockhold in the main event of UFC 199, his former opponent Dan Henderson was also on the card. In June 2016, it was a night for the small teams. On the undercard, Henderson surprised everyone by knocking out Lombard after a long time away. In one of the most exciting fights of 2016, two experienced middleweights went head-to-head. At the start of the fight, there was a lot of tension. Both men knew how strong the other was, and neither of them was going to make a mistake right away. As they got used to their range, they were able to make more powerful shots. Lombard was hit by a straight right hand from Henderson, which caught him flush. Lombard caught a kick that Henderson threw, and then Henderson hit Lombard with a back elbow that knocked him out cold. Before the referee could pull Henderson off of Lombard's dead body, he followed up with a couple of hard elbows to the ground. But the main event, in which Bisping knocked out Rockhold in one of the biggest upsets in MMA history, got all the attention. Bisping came out of the gate swinging. He started with a right hand, but Rockhold hit back with one of his strong leg kicks that he often uses in the UFC. But after about 3 minutes, Bisping quickly ended it with a quick left punch. The middleweight division was in a state of change, so the new champion soon had a rematch with an old opponent. Finally, let's talk about UFC 204. Michael Bisping's first title defense took place in Manchester at UFC 204. Even though the former Pride champion was 46 years old, he still had one of the best right hands in the game. Before the fight, Hendo said that he'd retire no matter what happened. Michael Bisping not only kept his UFC middleweight title, but he also beat Dan Henderson in a match that was 7 years in the making. In the beginning of the fight, there was a lot of tension but not much violence. Bisping tried to figure out how far away he was, and Henderson tried to land his signature overhand right. The crazy way the first round ended was a sign of what was to come. In the second round, Bisping's fitness seemed to be the thing that made the difference. He was the younger fighter, and he hit the 46-year-old with combinations from a distance. Then there was the H-bomb again. Henderson hit Bisping with another huge overhand right that knocked him down, and he finished the round with more ground and pound. Bisping came in third place. Henderson's overhand right hit a couple of times, but not as hard as it did in the first 2 rounds. The fifth round would be similar to the rest of the fight. Bisping hit more often, but Henderson kept things interesting with some of the harder hits. In the end, the judges only needed to see the fight to decide who was the winner. It was Bisping's last win of his career, and it ended his rivalry with the former Pride champion. And on that note, that's a wrap for this video. Which of these fights was the most brutal and explains the reason for the major feud between the two? Do you think it started with UFC 100? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and click on the subscribe button to our channel for more videos like this. Click on the bell icon to be notified when we upload more videos to the channel, and share it with your family and friends. We'll see you in the next one.